We're recording.
Okay. Hello everybody. Our project is called On and Off Task Behavior. The participants in this project are Afshin Merchant, myself, Amber Clark, Taylor Ficino, Megan Hill, and Danielle Underwood. The study we chose to replicate for this project was evaluating the effectiveness of self-monitoring technology for on-task behavior. The results actually showed that the study that on-task behavior actually increased with implementation of the self-monitoring technology. We picked two literature reviews to talk about today in our presentation. The first one was by Otero and Hunt, and they conducted a study in 2016 that examined the differential effects on self-monitoring of on-task behavior. The students used a vibrator, which was set to 1 minute, and it was for a duration of 20 minutes. And the students received reinforcement for a percentage of their sessions. The two students on task behavior actually increased when self-monitoring was paired with reinforcement, and it actually also increased when self-monitoring was alone. So just self-monitoring alone. So both, I think, so the study shows that both self-monitoring itself by itself and when paired with reinforcement seem to be effective for this literature review. The second literature review that we picked was by King and his colleagues, and that was done in 2017. We were also mindful to keep the literature review within the last 10 years to make it relevant. So anyway, this literature review was by King and his colleagues, and that was done in 2017. It studied the effects on manualized self-monitoring intervention called On Task in a Box, and it was used to determine whether this intervention called On Task in a Box would be effective in classroom settings. What On Task in a Box and On Task in a Box did was it combined self monitoring and video modeling as two interventions. The results showed, just as hypothesized, that On Task in a Box actually was effective in improving 6 students' behaviors that were previously low. It was interesting to note that even though both the methods were combined in this intervention, that delivering them independently one of each other have also been shown to be effective for improving on-task behavior. The purpose of this project was to determine the effectiveness of the county as an app for self-monitoring device on-task behavior, specifically when we used it with ourselves. And what we did is we used it to examine our on-task behavior while engaging with the Cooper textbook. The participants, materials, and setting. So the participants for this project were myself, Afshin Merchant, Amber Clark, Taylor Ficino, Megan Hill, and Danielle Underwood. The setting we used was our homes. We tried to simulate in such a way that it was natural, that we didn't change the location as to where we would usually work. So if somebody usually worked in a cafe shop, that would have been their preferred setting. But when we discussed it, all of us discussed that we actually only all study at home. So it was easy to pick the same setting of home. The materials that we used for this presentation were the County app, the multi-timer app, the Cooper textbook, Excel graphs, note-taking. So some of us, while engaging with Cooper textbook, actually took notes and underlined. So that was also included as on-task behavior, even if it included like picking up a piece of paper and shuffling it, it was still considered to be engaging with the Cooper text. We also used YouTube to upload our videos. We each, since we were 5 and we couldn't pair up as easily, what we did is that each of us paired up as a partner, so none of us were left out, and we gave each other our IOA data. We actually did it alphabetically, so we wrote our names down alphabetically, and I gave my IOA data to the next person alphabetically after me. We also uploaded our videos onto YouTube and sent a link to our partners so it was easy for them to see. And all of these links were also put in a document that was shared by each of us. Um, Along with the IOA data that was shared through YouTube, through a YouTube link, we also used a trainer video that was done by one of the members of our group, Amber Clark. And she will talk about the behavior definition and show the video next. Thank you.
Hey, sorry about that. My mic automatically muted after I unmuted it. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about the behavior definition. So we determined our definition from all talking together, just talking about our studying behaviors and what we consider to be on task when we're reading. So we defined it as actively engaging with the Cooper textbook. Examples included reading the text, taking notes, talking about the text, because some of us will read out loud or talk out as we're writing, just extra examples that we want to include. And then also we included like counting the pages, because sometimes it's like, okay, how many more pages do I have left before I finish this chapter and transition to the next? Non-examples that we included were doodling on the paper and then talking about anything not related to the Cooper text. We used, for our design, we used an A-B withdrawal design. So we started out with baseline. For intervention, we introduced the self-monitoring app. Then we went back to baseline, and then we'll reintroduce the self-monitoring app again. We only read from the Cooper text, and we would usually pick chapters that aligned with the modules that we're in on class. And we took duration for on-task behavior. So here is the training video that I created to kind of show how to set up your self-monitoring app and then the county app. So we had that signal of when we were supposed to respond to our self-monitoring app. All right, that was the training video. I'm not sure if the sound worked on it. I can also add a link whenever we post our presentation. But now Danielle's going to talk about a little more about baseline and intervention phases.
Okay, so this is just a little bit more about baseline and intervention phases. As was mentioned, for our baseline phase, each researcher or participant collected data once per day over a span of 5 days at 40 minutes per session. Each researcher used a recording device during the baseline phase to record their session. And afterward, each video was viewed to document the duration of the on-task behavior. These are the steps that we took in order to do that. Then during our intervention phase, each participant utilized a recording device, the county application that Amber reviewed, and the multi-timer application that Amber reviewed to self-monitor their on-task behavior and then to record the duration of their on-task behavior. The intervention phase spanned the exact same length of time as the baseline phase for 5 days or more, pending baseline stability, for 40 minutes per session. One video from each phase was submitted by each participant for IOA data collection, which Megan is going to discuss later.
Okay, so for IOA, each group member recorded one of their sessions for each phase of treatment. So we each uploaded a video onto YouTube of one baseline and one intervention, and we shared it with the group member that was selected for us. Each group member was assigned to view at least one group member's video to calculate the IOA. The IOA formula that we used was the smaller duration divided by the larger duration times 100. So these are our numbers that we got calculated for IOA. Afshin did Taylor's IOA for baseline. They calculated 95.9%. For intervention, 93.5%. Taylor's IOA was done by me, Megan. Baseline was 93.1. Intervention was 99.5. Danielle's IOA was done by Amber. Her baseline was 99%, and her intervention was 99%. My IOA was done by Danielle. For baseline, we got 99% and intervention 100%. Amber's IOA was done by Afshin. Her baseline was 98.1% and her intervention was 100. So for treatment integrity, we utilize a fidelity checklist at the end of each session to assess treatment integrity. There were several questions that we asked ourselves. The questions that were included were the materials present before the start of the video? Was the app started on time? Was the data collected at the end of every interval? Was the video recorded for all 40 continuous minutes? For IOA, did they observe the indicated start time for the data collection? Was it yes or no recorded at the end of each interval?
I'm going to talk a little bit about my data now. So even though my mean from baseline to even though my IOA, even though my baseline and my baseline average to my intervention average increased between the two interventions, between the intervention, I would still indicate that even though there was an increase on-task behavior in my graph, even though it was minimal, I would say that I would consider maturation to be a big contributing factor. Maturation is a threat to that is external to the individual participant. So what it is it's the possibility that the mental or the physical changes that occur within the participants themselves that could account for the evaluation of the results. For me, I thought that just sitting every day continuously for 40 minutes and reading the Cooper textbook, that the act or the habit in and of itself, I think played a very vital part that I could not detract and give totally to the app. So I don't think that the intervention was that effective for me, even though the data shows that it is, that my average did increase from baseline to intervention. And now Amber's going to discuss her data.
Hey, I would say for me that the self-monitoring was effective. From my baseline, I averaged about a mean of 34.28 minutes of being on task when I was reading. But when I introduced the self-monitoring app, I was able to stay on task for the full 40 minutes. It was just nice for me to be able to have like that reminder, like, hey, I'm reading right now. And then I could also track like how long I was within to the 40 minutes. I knew like, okay, I've made it 5 minutes, I've made it 15, I've made it 30, and then, oh, wait, now 40 minutes is up, and then I was done. Whereas like when I didn't have that, it's like, okay, I'm thirsty now, I'm gonna go do this, I'm gonna go do that, and then would have to come back. And then now, Danielle can talk a little bit about her data.
So I felt like the intervention wasn't really that effective for me. My baseline data was pretty stable. There wasn't a lot of variability. And my baseline mean, actually my average across all 3 phases pretty much stayed the same. So I pretty much remained on task through all 3 phases for about, 38 minutes. During baseline, intervention, and return to baseline. There seemed like there was maybe a slight increase during intervention phase of maybe like 0.2 seconds, but that is not very significant. And so because my baseline was so high and there wasn't very much room for improvement or change, and the return to baseline data is around the same average, it just demonstrates to me that the intervention wasn't really as effective for my on-task behavior as it may have been for others. And now Megan is going to talk a little bit about her data.
So as you can see from my graph, when I first started out in baseline, my data was a little low, and then it got higher when I went into intervention, and I was actually able to stay on task for the entire 40 minutes for each interval in the intervention phase. I felt like for me, this intervention was effective because I felt like in baseline, I was definitely off task a lot more. I was more tempted to like get out of my seat, be looking at my phone, talking to the person next to me, like playing with my dog. And in an intervention phase, the County app like really kept me on track. I felt like I was more motivated to stay on task because I had the constant reminder every 5 minutes to hit if I was on task or off task. So I felt overall this intervention was effective for me, even though the numbers didn't change significantly. So now Taylor will talk about her graph.
So for my data across all my sessions, I saw a slight increase from baseline to intervention. My average in my initial baseline was 35.5 minutes, and then my average for intervention was about 37.5. So there is about a 2-minute increase where my on-task behavior increased. So it's interesting. I actually had to add an extra session for intervention because my first session during intervention was actually my lowest data point or my lowest duration of all sessions. And so I thought adding that one, I just needed another one to kind of make it more stable, because it went from 33 and then right up to 38 the next day. And then following that, I have one data point so far returning to baseline, and it's actually back. It's almost at the same average as it was in the first baseline. So first baseline was 35.5 and the second baseline was 35.3. So for me, it was somewhat effective, but then right back to baseline, I'm down 2 points again. So if I continue the intervention, I'm curious to see how it changes. So for our limitations, one of them was that the authors of our source study, Wills and Mason, they examined participants that all of their participants had a diagnosed learning disability or ADHD, and the participants, us in the study, don't have any of those diagnosed disabilities, which we kind of discussed might have played a role in the effectiveness of the app that they used, and maybe that's why it was more effective for more of the participants in their study. And then another limitation we discussed was that we were self-recording our session. So in our source study, they were students being observed by secondary observers in a classroom. And so they didn't necessarily know that they were the ones being specifically observed at the time. But we did, because we had to set up our entire recording system. So we think that naturally kind of made most of us be more on task than we might normally be without being recorded. Which could kind of affect our kind of getting an accurate number for on-task behavior. And then another thing we discussed was that how technology is changing so quickly, because the app that was used in our source study wasn't even available to us anymore. It doesn't exist. And so we had to use the county app, which has similar features, which is why we selected it. But we discussed how maybe in the future, the county app might not be available for people wanting to use it. So we kind of have to constantly be adapting as technology just progresses. So conclusions that we came to, we felt that overall the intervention of the county app specifically as a self-monitoring application didn't significantly increase on-task behavior. The most that it did increase was for Amber, who had an average of 34 minutes during baseline, and then during intervention, it went up to 40 minutes. And then in contrast, Danielle's on-task behavior only experienced a 0.2 increase from baseline to, or 0.2 minute increase from baseline to intervention. So we kind of concluded that effectiveness of self-monitoring is pretty dependent on the individual, and especially the environment that you're in as well, because there's a lot of environmental factors that you could eliminate. Not having your phone next to you, having the TV off, not having anybody in the room with you. Those environmental factors you could eliminate, and then on its own, that might increase on-task behavior. And I think it's just dependent on what that individual needs at that moment. And so when implementing a self-monitoring intervention, we decided that they should be using the most effective tool for them, which would take some assessment. But like in some of the articles that we reviewed during our literature review, they were using just vibrations in the pocket or a timer or an app. And so those different methods might be more effective for different types of learners. And so that's the end of our presentation. We've also attached our contribution log. All of our meetings, we were pretty collaborative throughout the whole thing. And then our references are attached too, and that's our source study and then the two that we referenced from our literature review as well.